I Want to Believe, section. Revolutionary Youth or Patriotic Youth. His short-lived soccer career at an end, Homero Cristalli returned to his neighborhood like a minor god fallen from Olympus. Street credit, however, bought little in the Boedo bodegas, and returning to his working-class station also proved difficult. The hunched drudge of endless sewing repelled restless Homero from the family trade of shoemaking. He moved on to his more frenetic life as a metalworker, a common profession in Argentina, where expensive machines imported from Europe often called for locally produced replacement parts. Here, too, the piecemeal production of tiny widgets was excessive, the hours unceasing. Before long, a misuse of an industrial lathe cut his career short, along with half his right pinky and forefinger. He then switched to the nebulous career track of oficios varios, odd jobs. He tried his damaged hand at bricklaying, carpentry, and traveling sales, until he found a calling in the frequently available gig of painting homes and walls. Brush in hand, Cristalli became an artist of efficiency, strategizing with his coworkers to fill the blank as quickly as possible so they could return to their true passions. For him, it was politics. He joined the Socialist Party's youth group, the Socialist Youth, JS, where he earned a reputation as a dauntless newsie. Each day, he skipped the trolley to distribute the group's paper in between the Liniers and Avellaneda neighborhoods, a 3.5-hour route. An unmatchable force, he was soon appointed local secretary. The position had growing influence in the early 30s as the Socialist Party ascended on the back of the defensive strike wave. Wage cuts, mass layoffs, and other assaults on hard-earned workers' rights and civil liberties arrived with the international economic depression. With the Fora a more dangerous choice than ever, major unions merged into the Central General Confederation of Labor, CGT, in 1930. Their coordinated campaign successfully defended the 8-hour day and weekends, and pressured the state to replace Uriburu with Agustin P. Justo in 1931. Justo was a populist, more in the mold of Rigoyen, willing to negotiate labor struggles on the CGT's behalf, so long as they kept away from radical tactics and ideals. Strings of small victories swelled the ranks of the CGT to hundreds of thousands of members, its Socialist Party leadership enjoying a new base of electoral support that propelled them to second place in the 1934 legislative elections, with nearly 20% of the vote. But as fascism spread in Europe, the CGT's apolitical stance went out of style. Argentinians followed events in their old countries closely, particularly the political seesaw in Spain. Its monarchy finally overthrown in 1931, a Spanish republic was established with a majority socialist representation bucking the rightward turn in the rest of the continent. By 1935, however, the Popular Front government of communists, socialists, and liberals was pressured to the verge of collapse by reactionary elements led by the conservative General Francisco Franco. He launched a coup against the Republic in 1936, with the civil war that followed a clear proxy for the battle between socialism and fascism throughout the world. As Soviet arms and agents flooded into Madrid and German planes bombed Republican cities, a new generation of Socialist Party members were radicalized. Most notable was a group of CGT rail workers who resolved to build a more militant defense against fascism, and fired their stewards who disagreed. Supporters of the action formed a left caucus within the SP, the Partido Socialista Obrero, Workers' Socialist Party, PSO. Cristalli showed his support as well. Although unfamiliar with the complexities of the global situation, he was eager to support the Spanish Republic, and helped integrate members of the Socialist Youth into a solidarity coalition led by left-wing Spanish immigrants, the, quote, Committee to Defend the Spanish Revolution. At their social events, they shared stories of the war, explaining to a wide-eyed Homero why the group used the word revolution and not republic. A major force in Spain was the National Confederation of Labor / Iberian Anarchist Federation, CNT/FAI, an anarchist communist union similar to the Fora, but with membership in the millions. Although they boycotted the Republic's elections, they leapt to defend the Popular Front government from Franco's attack. For them, the war was not about defending liberal democracy from fascism, but destroying capitalism, and they tried to do both simultaneously. Alongside the anti-Stalinist communists in the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, POUM, they took full control of Catalonia, seized and collectivized factories and farms to make weapons, grew food to support the war effort, and began to create a functional anarchist society in the region. The near revolution witnessed from Homero's window had not been fully snuffed out with gunpowder, he realized, but had only changed form and location as it passed to a new generation that could redeem the failures of the past. As the radicals argued over the particulars of the war and revolution, the socialists for unconditional support of the Republic, and the anarchists arguing to push further, Cristalli, with little else to contribute, interrupted with an improvised song to the tune of an old Fora standard. Comrades, cease the discordance, that in this there is no nationality. Well, Spain fights for everyone, for the world of freedom. Come on, brothers, let's all unite, that in this struggle we must win. We will make the capitalist scoundrel disappear from the world. The room erupted into enthusiastic cheers. Their differences remained deep, but Cristalli's innocent passion reminded them all why they fought. A member of the committee transcribed the lyrics as a poem for publication in the Spanish expat newspaper El Republicano, popular with internationalist revolutionaries throughout the city. Among its readers were the, quote, Bolshevik-Leninists of the International Communist League, LCI, a small circle of Bohemian intellectuals that included founding members of the Argentine Communist Party, PCA, avant-garde artists, and existential philosophers. What united them most was their support of the POUM as a fellow participant in Leon Trotsky's international left opposition. Their most notorious member was Liborio Justo, son of Augustine. For his intransigent Bolshevik principles, he was known to his comrades as quebracho, a native species of wood so hard as to split the axes of colonists, who called it quebrar hacha, axe breaker. To everyone else, he was, quote, the president's communist son, a moniker coined in the tabloids after he shouted, "Down with Yankee imperialism," in the face of Franklin D. Roosevelt during a state visit. Less reported was his recent exit from the Communist Party, denunciation of Stalin for putting the cause of the Soviet Union above world revolution, and a public call for the construction of a new, truly revolutionary party. Other notable members of the Liga were Carlos Liacho, the son of Russian immigrants and translator of left opposition texts, Antonio Gallo, a political essayist best known for his writing on tango music, and Hector Raurich, a lawyer and Hegel scholar who started one of the first Bolshevik magazines in Argentina in 1920. With few links to the working class, their political practice was largely confined to night-long discussions on poetry, philosophy, Marxism, and taking down the counter-revolutionary leadership of the socialist and communist parties within the Art Deco cafes, between sips of coffee, wine, or bitter liquor. Quote, they had a literary conception of Trotskyism. Posadas wrote decades after falling out of their favor. Quote, all the first-stage Trotskyists were like this, with a sectarian, thus aristocratic attitude. Trotsky himself had a similar opinion of his Argentine admirers, calling them coffee shop wankers. Hoping Cristalli represented a potential exit from their intellectual isolation, they summoned him to one of their haunts on the Avenida del Mayo. Initially, they praised his poem for its strong revolutionary sentiment. His verse was simple, unjaded, and its call for unity specifically against capitalism expressed the heart of their disagreement with the Socialist Party and Stalinist strategy of forming common cause with liberals against fascism. By stressing the need for a more dynamic approach, they peppered him with questions. What did he think about the PCA, Stalin, and the Soviet Union? What was his opinion of Trotsky? What about Trotsky's recent criticism of his followers in the POUM for joining the Spanish Republic alongside the anarchists? Should the PSO reorient given this criticism? And why couldn't he write more like Federico Garcia Lorca? Hopelessly out of his league, Posadas recalled the meeting to be humiliating. He was nonetheless starstruck. Like the Spanish comrades, they spoke openly of a revolution, international and permanent, that unfolds within a society like Catalonia before spreading across the world. They corresponded with the revolutionaries in dozens of countries, Russian Bolsheviks, POUMists, the Surrealists in Europe, and the socialist painter Diego Rivera of Mexico, always in search of the path forward. Most seductively, they needed him. Quote, "I was the only worker, or union militant, or union organizer," Posadas wrote. So they said that I was a member of their group. They taught him the basics of their historical lineage and politics in subsequent meetings. After the USSR won its civil war, the failure of an international revolutionary wave left the Bolshevik regime isolated, forcing them to transform into an all-powerful bureaucracy to manage the economy and defend the victories of the October Revolution. By the end of the 20s, Stalin had led the USSR and Communist Third International through a, quote, zigzag of extreme positions, until eventually they resigned to a pursuit of socialism in one country, the USSR, and the protection of the privileges of its bureaucratic class. This is why he replaced the original Bolshevik strategy of a, quote, united front of anti-capitalist parties with the Popular Front to protect the liberal democratic regimes that tolerated the existence of the communist parties. The fascist threat was dire, Trotsky said, but alliances with the bourgeoisie only sacrificed the principle of their politics and the most potent weapon against fascism, proletarian revolution. Here, Cristalli would be of use. From exile, Trotsky encouraged his militants to enter anti-fascist groups and push the United Front strategy. Some members of the LCI had recently joined the PSO, agitating it towards their positions with a newsletter called the Bulletin of Revolutionary Marxism. But Stalinist agents from the PCA had their own faction, and with the help of Cristalli, they hoped to multiply their influence, earn leadership of the caucus, and steer the Socialist Party's mass base away from class collaboration. Cristalli signed on, effectively guiding his chapter of the Socialist Youth towards the entryist strategy of the LCI. He quickly proved himself so loyal that Justo gave him a second major assignment. He was to travel to Córdoba, an industrial metropolis deep in the Argentine interior, to reorganize the shoemakers' union, decimated at the end of the 30s, and push some of its workers to their faction of the PSO. He left Buenos Aires almost immediately for the home of labor lawyer Esteban Rey. Rey brought him to Céspedes, Tetamanti y Cia, the largest shoe factory in the region and his first target. Everything from there was second nature. He stalked the factory gates each day, asking every worker on their way in or out if they were in the union, and if not, pushing them to sign up on the spot. One of them, Angel Miguel González, told historian Roberto Ferrero that he remembered Cristalli as out of place. He was a, quote, huge guy, a gringo, compared to the more mestizo Cordobés, who tended to distrust the porteños after a century of regional conflict. Cristalli was able to overcome this obstacle, González recalled, by being, quote, very determined. He became a fixture at that and other factories and smaller shops for months, subsisting only on part-time painting gigs and hospital lunches scammed with a borrowed medical student identification. With an increase in union membership, workers became more confident to make demands. Soon, owners started to hire private police, forcing Posadas and Rey to come up with an innovative lookout system. One day, while pamphleteering outside the massive GRAFA factory, as work let out. His comrade on the corner held up a newspaper in front of his face, a signal that the management's thugs were coming up the block. Krystalyi threw his flyers under the car and walked into the crowd of workers, whistling the Internationale in an attempt to blend in. The efforts culminated in a major strike in the region at the end of 1937. Krystalyi was a leader of the winning effort, and the LCI's position strengthened as planned. At the PSO's National Convention in Córdoba, that year, several of its members were approved to run on the Socialist Party ticket for the Chamber of Deputies elections. The Socialists won 43 seats in the election 4 years prior, and they expected to improve with increased union activity. Krystalyi, now a hero of both soccer and syndicalism, was selected to run in his native Buenos Aires, where the SP candidates had the best chance of winning. But Justo was already having second thoughts about the strategy of entryism into the PSO after a correspondence with Diego Rivera. The artist had recently begun hosting Trotsky at his home in the Mexico City suburb of Coyoacán after negotiating an asylum deal with President Lázaro Cárdenas. The year prior, Trotsky had been tried in absentia in Moscow and sentenced to death on absurd charges of his having plotted with the fascist powers to kill Stalin and destroy the Soviet Union. In the months that followed, Stalin began enacting that sentence on Trotsky's friends and followers within the party and internationally. Stalinist agents in Spain began to arrest, torture, and execute POUMists, anarchists, and other groups hostile to Stalin's leadership in a counter-revolutionary terror that followed Franco's forces to seize the entirety of the country. To Trotsky, these were signs of how low Stalin would sink to protect his own regime at the expense of revolution, even predicting Stalin would align with Hitler to divide Europe. Hitler would then betray Stalin, leading to a total world war exponentially worse than the first. But this would make the likelihood of a revolutionary resolution exponentially greater. Quote, "Modern instruments of destruction are so perfected that mankind will probably not be able to withstand war more than a few months," Trotsky later told PSO candidate Mateo Fossa during a trip to Mexico. Quote, "Despair, indignation, and hatred will carry the masses of all countries at war to an armed insurrection. The socialist revolution is inevitable." End quote. Justo summoned the LCI and other comrades to his home in Buenos Aires to announce a new course of action based on this outlook. Trotsky was going to form a new communist international to replace Stalin's, he told them. Trusted safely out of harm's way with the U.S. Socialist Workers' Party, SWP, in New York. It would prepare to coordinate and lead an international revolution at the end of the war. In Argentina, they would need their own independent party, capable of seizing power and establishing a Latin American Soviet Union. This meant immediately abandoning the PSO electoral strategy. Although respect for Justo and Trotsky ran deep, few were convinced. Liacho and Gallo insisted entryism remained the correct strategy to expand ranks and influence. The Cordobans disagreed with being led by Buenos Aires, let alone by New York. Posadas described the meeting as devolving into a circus, resulting in 8 different groups. Adding to the absurdity, he said, was the setting, Justo's, quote, palace, an heirloom of the Buenos Aires oligarchy. Krystalyi stayed in the campaign. To him, it seemed another step on his unlikely upwards trajectory into a political career. With Election Day approaching, he was the headline speaker at daily rallies, attracting hundreds in Córdoba and thousands in Buenos Aires. But the enthusiastic crowds did not translate to votes. PSO candidates received just 28,000 in Buenos Aires, a third of what mainstream SP candidates received, itself a third of their 1934 total. Outpaced by the more moderate Radical Civic Union of Irigoyen, the SP won only 5 seats and lost 30. Along with the defeat came new notoriety for the LCI. Until then, they had used a variety of names to refer to themselves: Bolshevik Leninists, left socialists, or revolutionary Marxists. A denunciation from the PCA, however, finally gave them a name that stuck. Beginning of long quote. Among the sworn enemies of the Democratic Alliance, the Popular Front, are the Trotskyists. Their importance does not originate in their insignificant number. Their importance lies in their sabotage activity. They try to speak at meetings, and they join other workers' parties to further their strongly anti-communist activity. Hidden behind their slogan of the proletarian revolution, they try, in the present situation and conditions, to isolate the PCA, to split the working class movement, and to sabotage any attempt at unity. We must struggle with the greatest intensity against the ideological influence of Trotskyism. End of quote. They were expelled from the PSO, which soon after dissolved into factions that either entered the mainstream of the Socialist Party or joined the PCA. The LCI fractured from there. Cristalli went back to Cordoba to continue working with Ray. For the first time, he studied Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, and rose to a position of leadership in their cadre. He also found love. Her name was Candida Rosa Previtera, one of the shoemakers he organized in the strike. He proposed to her in a cafe. Quote, "We had 10 cents. We drank 1 coffee between us," he said. In place of a ring, he offered her Trotsky's, quote, "transitional program." "Look, this is what I struggle for. This is the objective of my life," he told her. "I have many things to learn. We are going to be very hungry. We are going to be persecuted. They can kill us, but we must live for this. There are many things that I don't understand, that I don't know, but we are going to learn along the way. I invite you to live with me for this. This is the objective of my life." End quote. She accepted. In 1939, he produced and distributed his first known pamphlet, Organismo Juvenil Obrero o Frente Juvenil Patriotico, translated by the Posadists as Revolutionary Youth or Patriotic Youth, for Buenos Aires' May Day demonstration. Showing how much he had absorbed from the Trotskyists and progressed as a political thinker, it was a polemic against the enthusiasm for Popular Front anti-fascism among his former comrades in the Socialist Youth. Quote, "Against fascism, they say, we must form an anti-fascist youth. Yes, we respect this, but only when there is an agreement on the criteria of class put always first. One must acknowledge that many of the same bourgeois affirm anti-fascism as a political panacea in order that all the world simultaneously ignore the interests and the fundamental antagonisms of class, and globally arrive in the categories of a liberal or bourgeois sympathetic anti-fascist, or to a pure nationalist anti-fascist, or to a true patriot anti-fascist, and finally to scare everyone into sustaining the current regime." End quote. The text was, for the most part, nuanced, effective, and concise, especially compared to the freewheeling screeds for which he would become notorious decades later. But other moments foreshadowed some of those eccentricities. Criticizing the slogan, quote, "for the right of the youth to work, to sport, to culture, and to love," for instance, he described, quote, "sport as a means of strengthening and, quote, harmonizing the body in order to similarly harmonize the team, and eventually all society." This was effectively impossible under capitalism, where workers exhaust their energy selling their labor power, turning sports into a professionalized spectacle that diverts attention from class antagonism. The right to, quote, "love" made him far more indignant. Beginning of long quote. What are they asking in this tremendous demand? Who has the divine power to grant love? Is love purely a material good, a thing that one can legislate, regulate, grant, like one legislates, regulates, and grants territory? Or does it pretend to reduce love to a simple sexual accompaniment? And the demand does not dare to speak of free prostitution? End quote. Summarizing these slogans as utopian and thus alienating to workers, Homero proposed 18 alternative demands oriented towards material improvements in their lives. The unpaid apprenticeships common among young workers would be banned. Hours and recognition in unions would be made equal between young and old, men and women. He closed with a vision of the formation of worldwide, quote, international revolutionary youth, within a broader international revolutionary party, led by militants independent of the established union and party leadership. Homero stopped just short of revealing that the party had been established the previous year. It was an unnecessary detail for the pamphlet's target audience, the rank and file of the socialist youth, who would find out about the Fourth International once it arose in Argentina. Hoping to earn a major role in its establishment, he sent the pamphlet to its second audience in Coyoacán. End of section.